You let us worry.
Don't worry, I'm doing fine. Yeah.
So, are you having any fun, or is it pain distracting you?
I don't have a lot of pain. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. See you.
Hello. It's been quite an eventful week. We've had a lot go on, as I'm sure many people know about. We're in terms of the format today, Kelly Foster will be giving the updates, and we'll talk about those changes, the changes that have resulted in that after we give the technical updates, and then we'll move on to updates about the board meeting. We should have the minutes out. Kenny, when do we think we'll have the minutes out?
Right. So today there'll be unofficial minutes, but that's one thing that the board decided, was that we will be publishing unofficial minutes as quickly as possible, but no less within.
Yeah, absolutely.
We decided 7 days.
Okay, so Kelly, are you up to giving a technical update?
I am. Actually, I would like to request that first we talk about the change that's happened to the team. It'll make the technical update make more sense. Is that okay?
Of course, that's certainly the case. Do you want me to drive that? I'm happy.
Yes, please.
Okay, very good. So as people probably knew, we had negotiated, I think it was 2.5 weeks ago now, to bring the team over in-house. The vast majority of the team has come over in-house, with the exception of Meta, Michael Birch, Mateusz, and Thomas Vasily. So we're happy to have the developers come over, but we also recognize that that's going to mean some rejiggering of responsibilities. So in particular, we have decided to, or rather, graciously, Ned and Deanna and Kelly are dividing up project management roles, and then we are looking at the rejiggering of some of the development responsibilities, including bringing on some additional staff. Let's see. I'm wondering, is there anything else that needs to be said about the team changes, Kelly?
No, that's great. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
My understanding is that Michael Birch's contract is a trial 2-week contract. Is there any truth to that?
I don't have any visibility into that. But you're free to reach out to Michael and ask him.
Okay, I have no personal relationship with Michael except a brief conversation at DevCon in Boulder. So if anybody else wishes to reach out to Michael, that would be useful intel.
Sure.
I have a question. The developers, I think, used to go to the Pyrofex office, or at least a number of people did. What's the current plans around that office or office space for this core team?
I can speak to that. Most of the team was distributed. Actually, very few people are here at the office. I'm actually still here at the office. That's where I'm speaking to you from today. But the other developers that were on the project that were employees of Pyrofex, that are employees of Pyrofex, were not part of that contractual move from Pyrofex to RChain. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does. Thanks. I just was trying to get an idea of how disruptive physically it was for people, and it seems like not all that much.
No, very little physical disruption. We're used to spanning 10 time zones.
I think it's important that people realize that in-house does not mean physically in-house.
Correct.
Right. Right. It's just that from these calls and things like that, the background of PyroFX is visible. And so there's some perception that there's a locality of where work happens, and that's really not the case except in a small number of people.
That's correct. That's right. Good. Any other questions about the team transition? Awesome. Okay, so then we can move over to the technical updates.
Sure, thanks for that. I'm putting a link here in the chat window, and I will share my screen. So as mentioned, as related to what's been happening over the past week or so, I think it's important for you to know that by and large, the development team has been very, very focused on their work over the past month as things, it was probably people who are here on the call or people who are listening and are familiar with what's been going on in Discord. The team has generally been very not paying attention to that, and so has been very focused. And it was just recently with the changes in the contracts and other things that were happening that the team became distracted, and actually we came to a full work stop at the end of last Wednesday. That was when the contract that we had, including myself, had with PyroFX ended, and that we were then extended contracts from the cooperative, and then we engaged in a process of reviewing those contracts and negotiating with the co-op on the terms of those contracts. And so it was when Thursday and Friday that work fully stopped. There was no work done. You can see in GitHub that there were no commits made. And that we truly then picked up again here on Monday. And so what I'm going to, the report I'm largely going to give is a lot has been on hold, and we're starting to pick up the pieces. Also, we've lost some team members, and it's created some gaps. And Deanna, Ned, and I are working very closely with the team this week to understand where those gaps are, what was in flight, and what we're going to do to mitigate the work that still is very important and needs to be done as we understand the current team, and then hope to bring in others who can help support the work. So with that, I turn to the community update, which is on my screen, and that the rolling team is continuing work that was in the last sprint to do the hardening against deeply nested programs. That's largely bug work that came out that they're working on. Some refactoring work was completed this week, and it went into the code base, and also added examples onto how to interpolate rolling code with pars also went in. The Casper team there is work in progress to mitigate risks related to lazy validators, and the primary focus of the Casper team is on testnet, and I'll get to that in just a minute. The Node team is investigating and working on bugs. A lot of these bugs come up in our Tuesday tests. So again, thank you very much to those who participate in those. We will continue having those going forward, and do look forward to getting your help to find those bugs. The team likes to work on them. And then Pavel's continuing his work to support blocks of all sizes. It's a pretty meaty issue that work has spanned this sprint and likely to go into next sprint. Also, the Node team is suspending some work to help with testnet. Storage team work is in progress to persist memory DAG representation on disk, and this is so that a node can recover should it go down, that it can then look to disk to regain its state. And then the team is working to fix issues on testnet. And then finally, the SRE team is supporting issues on testnet, as well as investigating some testing issues and fails that we're seeing in our CI system. That's causing the team some frustration as they try and get code into the code base and wanting it to pass tests and do so reliably. Okay, so testnet. have some known issues, and we have over the past 2 weeks started to see these issues, and we can reproduce some of them, working to reproduce all of them. Actually, some good news came in overnight. They were able to reproduce an issue that was particularly difficult to suss out, so that's pretty exciting. It is our high priority this week. We have full stopped, as you heard me say, some teamwork so that we can focus on testnet. We want to make sure that we can get a testnet up, and that's going to be performant and stable and do all the things that we want it to do. Largely, there's two big spots where we're getting stuck, and one is an investigation of an unused COM event bug. That's the one that was difficult to reproduce, but was reproduced successfully overnight. So looking forward to some good news there in the future. And then the other is a fix that actually somebody completed last week, but we hadn't fully tested due to the work stoppage. So we're in the process of testing that and to make sure that it truly does fix this unknown error related to propose. So that work is going on. And then, as always, you can find information on the developer website. So with that, I'll pause. Are there any questions? All right, thanks for the time.
So Kelly, I think probably by next week we'll have a good sense of when we can expect to go ahead and cut node 8. Yes.
That's the goal. Yeah, let me, and this is not in the report. Thanks for bringing this up, Greg. We did meet together as a team, including Greg and the development team and Ned and Deanna and myself today, to make sure that there's clarity on what the minimum viable mercury looks like, and as well as to make sure that everyone's aligned on what those features are, and what is a have to have and what is a nice to have. And then we will use that to inform the Node 8s and 9 releases, which are largely planned. There's not going to be a lot of shift in that, but wanting to just make sure as our team has changed and as our, we've lost some knowledge along the way with that, making sure that we all are in agreement of what we're working quickly towards. And so I do anticipate in the next week, having a better sense of what Node 8 looks like and when it lands, as well as just a real clear sense of what Mercury looks like, and making sure that it lands on the timeline that we'd like.
Great. Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good color and clarification. I appreciate that.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So this is Chris. Is that feature list published anywhere?
We'll publish a version of it shortly. Okay.
And then second question is, I asked this in the chat last night, but I'll just bring it up here as well, which is I think we can assume with the departure of some of the devs that there's impact on the timeline. And I was just curious, when do we think we'll have a good idea of the new estimates for getting to node 9?
That's what we're working through, right? So we're making sure that we have a consensus within the team regarding requirements and features that map to those requirements, and the resources we've got versus resources that are coming on. So we have to kind of go through that process. Once we have gone through that process, then we can give a better timeline.
Right. Sorry, my question was just how long do you think that process will take to get to that new timeline? Like, do we think next Wednesday we'll know, or 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or?
I think we'll be very close.
Yeah.
I think we'll be very close in the next week to week and a half, Chris.
Got it.
That's certainly the goal. I mean, in as much as there's work to do, the devs also want to make sure that they're doing the right work. So we are very eager to get them off on at least a sprint plan as quickly as possible that is pointing us to Mercury.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Kelly.
Greg, I just want to say one thing real quick before we move forward. We do have Zach on here from White Block.
Yep, and we'll be introducing them in just a little bit. We just have to get through some basic updates, and then
no problem. Just making you aware. I didn't know if you were okay.
Yeah, I saw Zach. Hey, Zach, I'll introduce you to the community in just a bit. We just have a few updates to get through. So with that, I would like to move it over to Kenny, who will be reporting on the board meeting from yesterday.
Thanks, Greg. Kind of share my screen. I'm also going to be sharing to everybody weekly reports on operational updates. So this is going to be a pretty thick update today. So just going specifically to the items of business, what progress has been made in the last week? So currently there is a working draft of an operational roadmap. And again, these links, when they are published on the blog, they'll be linked so you can look at the corresponding documents, and I've got them here. We can take a look at them briefly. A conflict of interest policy, which has got a working draft and is now open for comment from Barry Cinnamon, one of our newest board members. Member participation in governance. This is, I posted this one maybe a day or two ago, but things tend to get dropped pretty quickly in chat, as I'm sure most of you know. Things get buried almost immediately. So this is a open document, and the link will be there. Anyone with the link to this will be able to modify it, but this is a template for how we might do a membership participation in governance process. This is modeled similarly to an EIP process, or for when RChain does a RChain improvement process. This would be so in the items of business, and here it says that a item something that is of importance needs to be worked out and defined, and then that needs to be published to the community for comment, and then which is a non-binding process, and then some level of sentiment or expression of will at the end, and then a decision, a published decision to a link to the decision or some documentation to that decision. That's the rough outline of what this document entails here. And when this document with the updates gets published, everyone will be able to go ahead and take a look at that and then add their comments to that. If they think a better way, there's a different way to do this to fulfill the requirements in this EIP or item of business, then absolutely open to that. In terms of the monetary policy, so currently where we are at, all of the wallets have been funded, and now we need to define the specification for the mint contract. We haven't started work on this yet, but that work will be started up pretty soon here. One item I'm really happy about is the RChain improvement process. So we are doing this working group style. So currently, the working group has had one meeting. That meeting was held just before this meeting, and it was a brainstorming / just a review of current best practices in the market, meaning the Ethereum improvement process. Mostly a little bit of comments came in from the Bitcoin improvement process. That's where we are headed in terms of pointing this working group. So the next steps in those working groups is I will put out a general link for invitation to join this group. And then once the members are known, we'll probably divide them up into different groups. So we might follow what's called a RChain model, where there are some individuals accountable, some individuals that are responsible, some individuals that are consulted, and others that are informed. This document, how this working group will be structured and finalized, will be due in next week. So that's where we are with that. And then there will be regular meetings to further define the process by which the protocol is improved into the future. Okay. Bylaws amendment that was taken care of. So that leads me into the board meeting that happened yesterday. So we did appointment of officers. It was the first step in our process. So let me actually this is a copy of the unapproved minutes. So these minutes will be taken and they will be published in an unapproved or at least informal fashion. So in sense of our officers, Evan Jensen declined to continue as secretary. So Barry Cinnamon is serving as secretary until a replacement can be found. Also, Kate was well, you'll see here, but Kate was not reappointed as treasurer, but she will be continuing in that capacity until a replacement is found. Furthermore, Greg was appointed as president, and there was also a further note here that Greg the board is attesting to a plan of action that Greg has put forth to the board. Now, that plan of action you will also see is right here. This plan of action will also be linked in this document. So you can go and see the plan of action or the roadmap. Yeah, so everybody, if they couldn't hear, Greg asked if we could go over what's most important here. So resolved that after mainnet launch of Mercury and the backlogs have completed, before Venus feature development begins in earnest, Greg will step down as the president and transition to another relationship within the co-op that needs to be decided furthermore. And that will be further negotiated. In the interim, I will serve as president when Greg steps down, and the board will initiate a process of phasing out the office of president in favor of a council of vice presidents of engineering, marketing, token economics, and finance and governance. So the board, after that, resolved to create these positions, and they also nominated myself to serve as governance, vice president of governance. All right, next would be the resolutions for the annual meetings. All of them were approved. So this is now, this is sort of like after an election where the elections are certified. This is the final stamp. Now it is law. This is the policy for putting together or publishing the board minutes unofficially. We approved a disciplinary policy, which will also have a link. And then there's a comment here about RChain Europe, which we did not decide in the meeting, but it was discussed. And then the meeting adjourned at about 2 hours after it began. So those are my updates. If there are questions, I'd be happy to take those.
First of all, Kenny, I want to really applaud the fact that board minutes are being communicated so quickly, and this is great. One thing I suggest is that from the board minutes, and I'm sorry for the background noise here in Singapore on near a busy street. One thing I suggest is that extracting from the board minutes, if we could possibly identify those things that will most nearly and fully address community and investor concerns. Like, go through the investor and community concerns and say, okay, here's a big concern. Here's how what we're doing is addressing those concerns. You see what I mean?
Well, certainly. So I guess that I can address those questions, or Greg can. Greg, why don't you actually do that, since this is mostly pertaining to your role?
Well, I mean, I think there are several different things. For example, I think there was community concern about transparency, which has been, I think, largely addressed. Jonathan pointed that out on a number of different points. There was a community concern with respect to the various items of business. Those have been officially approved. And then there's been the community concern about the plan moving forward, and the in particular for the transition for me and the overall management restructuring. So I think that was very clear. We sort of have restructured the officer makeup, and we have, and so in particular, we will be looking for a new CFO, and we have created officially created the vice presidential roles for engineering, marketing, finance / economics, and governance. And we will be looking to fill those roles in the not too distant future, and then eventually phasing out the role of president entirely to make this a much more decentralized organization. And that gives me the opportunity to be free to do, free from the day-to-day operations, which will become increasingly more and more difficult after mainnet launches. So we'll have lots and lots of operational issues and other kinds of issues between mainnet and the rollout of the Mercury backlog that will have to be addressed by someone. And if I'm addressing those things, I cannot be focused on the Venus features with the kind of full attention that I would like to be I would like to be giving to those problems. So that's that. The plan more or less addresses each of those requirements. Let's see. I'm trying to think what other community concerns were there.
I think there was concern about the strength of the board, and I was wondering if there was any plan to appoint temporarily fill the vacant seats.
Right. So thank you. The board had a lot on its plate, and we elected that amongst the items, filling the vacant seats would be taken up at the next board meeting. So we have not made a decision, and simply just did not have time at the board meeting to tackle that particular question. Any other questions, comments, concerns? So the people understand the board meetings happen every there are regular board meetings happening the first Tuesday of every month at 12 in the afternoon Pacific time, and then we call special meetings. So we had such a large agenda from yesterday's meeting that we agreed to call a special meeting, which I called for at the meeting yesterday. We're currently looking to have one on Friday, possibly, but haven't heard from everyone on the board yet.
Sounds good. I think you answered all my concerns.
Good. Any other questions from the community? Okay, so one of the things that came up in conversation with the dev team over the last few days is that we want to get QA, more QA into the mix. And I have felt that it is important to do this both internally and externally. So we are engaging with some folks, we'll be talking with some folks to provide some internal QA roles. But there's another, the external role I think is actually really, really important. It is not necessarily the case that quality assurance organizations have to have an adversarial role with respect to development. But we do have to have some kind of distance, I think, to get really the right kind of QA. And so we do have various organizations from HackerOne to the testnet games, but the more we can get coverage here, the better we are. And recently, Christian brought to my attention a report on EOS that was put together by a group that has graciously come to the meeting today. And I'd like to introduce them and also offer the report that they provided to the community as an interesting read on the EOS network, which in some ways can be viewed as a not a competitor, but another network in this space of blockchain offerings. And so I'd like to introduce Zach. And Zach, did you bring Neil with you, or is it just you?
It's just me.
Awesome. Cool.
Just me. Yeah. How's it going?
How's it going?
Hope you're not disappointed.
No, not at all. I just wasn't sure which of your team members would had come along. So tell us more about your organization and your role in it, and what you did.
We're a blockchain testing company. We developed a blockchain specific framework for testing, distributed, decentralized peer-to-peer networks, distributed ledger technology, and like blockchain specifically, right? So we built like an agnostic framework for testing, and what we can do is provision multiple nodes with whichever client is needed, and each one of those clients exists within their own local area network, have their own independent IP address, so they're actually logically separated from one another and physically separated to some degree, and then we're able to configure the links between those nodes and implement various degrees of packet loss or latency or whatever you need, congestion, in order to actually replicate real world performance. So that way, rather than relying on a public testnet or some non-deterministic testing mechanisms, you can just create an environment that allows you to test with a high degree of control and granularity. So further, we can also automate various behaviors, transaction, load, volume. We can test different Byzantine conditions, partitions. We can fork the network and observe different effects on performance and security. And we do a bunch of stuff like that. So that pretty much sums it up.
Very good. That's it's a nice complement to the various approaches that we've been considering so far. And can you tell us a little bit about the work that you did on EOS and what your results were?
Hold on, I saw somebody asked any DOS testing. Yeah, so that's what we do. Is we do load testing or stress testing. So you can either blast your smart contracts or your nodes or whatever, the network as a whole, with transactions. You can either randomize those parameters or you can assign specific values to them, so we can observe like the effects on the network at different weights and volumes. But so our most recent research focused on the EOS platform, and it was about, in total, maybe probably about like 5 or 6 months total, and then our testing initiatives were about 3 months in total. And we released our research last week, and it's kind of like been a shitstorm from the EOS community, but I think it was pretty good.
But can you go over the summary of the results? I think it would be very useful.
Yeah, so we kind of have a standard testing approach here that we've kind of developed on our own just after testing multiple systems. So we'll test transactional throughput under a variety of network conditions like latency or packet loss. And then we also test partition tolerance, and then we try to identify different attack vectors through a series of manual tests. So we kind of just ran it through the gamut that we usually do for all the other platforms. It really wasn't much different than any of our other tests. It's just this was like the biggest deal, I guess, because everybody's like, oh, EOS. I think they have a more rabid community of followers. So, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I'd suggest you guys check out the paper. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Awesome. So what were your findings with respect to the transaction rates?
Well, so we didn't include this part in the research paper because we were trying to observe real world conditions, like conditions that would actually occur in a distributed network that's like global. So under ideal conditions where the client that is sending the transactions and the machine or actor that's performing as a block producer are on the same machine or within the same local area network, transactional throughput was relatively high. It was around 3,000 to 4,000 or so. But as soon as we separated those functions and separated the process of sending and receiving transactions logically from the block producer itself, throughput then dropped to generally, like, I think it was like maybe 900 at the most. And then as soon as we add volume to the transaction, so it's important to note that when we receive this high volume of throughput, the transactions themselves were empty. They weren't really transactions at all. They were just bare actions that had very little associated metadata. And you can see this in their live network when they try to say, oh, well, we're wrong because we didn't get 4,000 transactions when we were testing under realistic conditions. But you can see that the only instance in which they had TPS at that size, all of those transactions were just dummy transactions that were signed. I love BM. BM is Bytemaster. So obviously that was Dan Larimer trying to stress test the system, and we can only assume that it's from the same local machine under the same conditions that we presented, in which we identified the similar performance. But as soon as latency and logical separation were introduced between the client and the block producer, throughput dropped by half. After transactional volumes rose, throughput dropped it halved again. And then we added packet loss, and then it halved again. And then we added more clients, and it halved again until it was really not much better than anything else out there that we've seen so far. But this is something that the EOS community wants to argue, but we're able to replicate these tests, and we're happy to share any of the data pertaining to our topology or whatever. So yeah, that was it.
No, that's awesome. That's really. I mean, I love the methodology. I mean, that's the thing that I find very compelling.
Right. So
and it complements the methodology that we're taking here, right? So this is kind of controlled environment approach to testing versus in the wild testing, and I think we need both.
Right. Well, it's good for unit testing to just test out in a public testnet, for instance, or if you're just testing something basic. But when you're testing lower level protocols, or you're testing trying to acquire like a holistic understanding for how this system functions and what makes it either perform well or not perform very well, you want to have a granular degree of control over the environmental conditions, and you want those test results to be repeatable and deterministic. So that way you can really understand what makes a system good, what makes a system suck. And once you figure out what sucks about it, you can reproduce those scenarios, and you can reproduce those test cases. And then you can just through, the scientific process, you can figure out how to optimize the system. So this is how you build a system that works and functions at scale in the real world. And this is a traditional process in the software industry, but in the blockchain space, we have to account for a certain degree of emotion because I'm trying to think of it objectively. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't give a shit about Ethereum or EOS. I care about blockchain. I want a job in 10 years, So I want blockchain to succeed. I want it to be something more than just a fringe science that's kind of limited to people trying to speculatively capitalize on an unregulated market. I want it to become an everyday solution that helps us build the decentralized world of the future. So that's what I'm about. I'm about building a decentralized world.
Yeah. I'm totally with you, and that's why when we spoke yesterday, I was so happy, and I immediately thought I should invite you to the call. One of the things that you and I talked about is on the one hand, getting you engaged with the co-op so that we can set up a testing environment using that methodology. And the other, so from that point of view, I think it would be, it's actually really a very, very good thing for the co-op to spend money to do that. But if we were going to publish a paper, I think we'd want a more objective kind of analysis. And so one of the things that I thought about was that work might be funded by an external body like various community members who really want to make sure that their investment is worth it.
Right. Yeah. So that was the intent of our research conducted on EOS, which is why we went through Bounty's network. So Consensus was actually only one of 20 organizations and individuals that contributed to the project. But for some reason, people are focusing on Consensus to say that our results were somehow biased. But the results would have been the same regardless. We're not paid shills, so whatever.
Fair enough. No,
I'm sorry. May I ask a question? Zach, this is really great information. I'm sorry about the background noise. Really quickly, the question that I had is, I think that I've been seeing a lot of noise around EOS transactions being spoofed, as in, sort of block for this. Is that the same thing that you just mentioned a while ago? I just wanted to tie together the two concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easily manipulated. I mean, there's no real checks and balances to ensure identity or anything like that on the blockchain. But ultimately, I don't really care about transactional throughput. If you want a high degree of throughput, just use a traditional client-server architecture and use Stripe. The reason that I choose blockchain is for decentralization, privacy, security, censorship resistance. And I don't think that EOS necessarily reflects any of those points in a deterministic or mathematically enforced manner. So,
hey Zach, how do you personally define a transaction?
I define a transaction as the transfer of data, whether that's an asset or whatever, whether that's a token or any other sort of data asset, the transfer of that from one entity to another, whether that's a user who owns a token and has an account, or whether that's a node that's transferring data to another node. So that's an action that's processed in a cryptographic manner, included into a block, and then made available to the recipient. So I would say that like when I send you a transaction, for instance, like let's say that we're using Bitcoin. The transaction begins when I sign that transaction and submit it to the network and broadcast it. And the transaction ends when you receive it and are able to spend it or are able to exert control over it. So that's what I would define as a transaction, which is a very high level explanation because it would also depend on the system. So
are you
actually, Jonathan, if I might jump in here?
This is a really important question. So are you, Zach, using a computer science notion of a transaction as opposed to perhaps a retail description of a transaction where in order to fulfill a certain action, it might be multiple COM events?
Sorry, I got distracted. There's a really loud beeping noise that scared me.
So Jonathan, I just wanted to jump into the conversation here. Zach's definition corresponds almost precisely to our notion of COM event. Just so that we're clear.
Yeah, well, but also there's different definitions depending on the system and the use case. So really, yeah. But I would say that that would be a more general definition that we could apply to most systems, and it would be applicable. Yeah. But ultimately, I think that transactions would be defined by control, the ability to control that data or that asset as an individual. So whenever I am able to control that and I am the owner of it, then that transaction has completed and it's mine, or whoever's, whether it's not just me as an individual. It's just like any entity, whether it's a logical machine or a human being that owns an account.
Just so that we're clear, this is precisely the notion of a COM event. The COM event lines up with this idea exactly.
Yeah. So some people call them actions, some people call them transactions, whatever. So, hello.
Okay, very good. So thank you so much, Zach, for that presentation. Does anyone else have any questions for Zach?
Well, Greg, one thing we brought up yesterday on the call with Neil and Zach was the question whether or not the community would want to create a proposal to work with Whiteblock in some way. That way, because it would look very bad if RChain would pay directly for the services. Because, I mean, Zach, let's be very clear here. You say you're not a paid shill, but like your services do cost something, like testing, especially on your own hardware or on the cloud, does cost money. Those are not cheap things, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So would the community be potentially interested in creating a proposal and getting RChain tested closer to mainnet? I don't know if it's necessary now, but I think the conversation should be brought up at some point.
Well, actually, so what I was proposing, Christian, was a twofold approach.
Mm-hmm.
So one is we would like to engage Whiteblock for internal testing. This is a very natural fit to use their methodology because their methodology allows for reproducible failures that are caused by load and other kinds of network effects, which is different than the kind of thing we get from in the wild testing, right? Because in the wild testing is the methodology makes it harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to do repros with the same kind of condition controls.
Right, it's nearly impossible. That's why I started developing Whiteblock over a year ago now, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes sense for the co-op to engage Whiteblock for QA, and especially given that the dev team just asked for QA, I felt like it was another piece of RChain magic in operation. Right, in the morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, the dev team is asking for more QA, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a very nice approach to one aspect of QA shows up. So I thought that was really a lovely synchronicity. But when it comes to issuing a report, right, that internal testing can't lead to a report, right? The report would need to.
Well, it could lead to a report, but it's because you're going to want documentation of the tests and the results and the parameters that resulted in it. But you don't have to release that publicly. That's up to the client. So we don't really we work with certain clients that don't want us to share anything, and that's fine. That's up to them. So we're just kind of providing the utilities, and we develop a scope of work with that client, and then we perform the tests accordingly, and then we provide them with the results. And we don't have to share it. We don't have to mention it. It doesn't need to be a media circus. It's just these people.
But what I would love very much is if we could find an independent individual or a group of individuals that would want to fund the work to have Whiteblock prepare a report for RChain. Right. So there is a kind of, we don't want this to be like, a pharmaceutical, kind of approach here, right? We would like it very much to be a much more objective.
So what I would recommend is perhaps we could open a bounty on Bounty's network, and then anybody who would like to contribute is able to contribute in that manner to the bounty itself. So
that's a reasonable approach. That's a reasonable approach.
And then it's publicly auditable, and it's traceable, and it's on the blockchain. So
yes, even better.
Couldn't they earn bonded rock for their efforts?
Oh, that as a way of funding the bounties. Yeah, that's an approach. Very good.
Yeah, well,
I think that would have to go through the membership, like a full membership vote, though, and that would also need to be accountable and public and audible as well. If we're going to go directly through ROC funding instead of going through the Bounty Network, which literally anybody from the Ethereum community or otherwise could fund. If you hold ROC and you're funding a contract, I mean, you should probably be a member. So yeah, just be very clear, you know.
cool.
Okay, so Jonathan, I want to take up your question in just a minute. So thank you again very, very much, Zach, for taking the time to come to the RChain Community Hangout. We hope that you won't be a stranger. We would love to have you back as often as you feel suits your schedule. I did want to leave a little bit of time to chat about a couple of other things. So there was an internal discussion over the last few days. We feel it is important to issue sort of some education in terms of what we know about Casper Labs. So rather than sort of spend a lot of time in Discord with a kind of free for all, the best approach is to provide a statement that we can point people to in terms of what our understanding of Casper Labs and the effort and how that relates to the co-op's effort. I mean, in general, you know, of course, we want to take the high road. You know, from my point of view, and I think from many people in the blockchain space, this isn't really. I'm not really thinking about this as competition, but as ensuring that we have the highest value platform, that the platform that people rely on is one with the highest quality, and so when multiple people are working on the same concepts, then you know we've seen that there's a kind of wisdom of the crowd. I think also that there's we want to be clear that there are different governance models when something is a private institution versus when something is a foundation or a cooperative or other kinds of approaches. So and I was delighted to that at the top of the hour here we had a clear indication that the cooperative has heard the community from the AGM and is taking steps to address and implement all the items of business and to address all the questions that have come from the community. So I feel like that's very, very much the way we would like to have community governance related to what I think is at least with respect to public blockchains, these are public utilities, and so they should be having a similar kind of governance. But anyway, so we won't be engaging further in conversation on Discord about this, but simply to issue a statement via our official channels, the co-op blog, to sort of collect our position. So let me stop there and check and see if there are any questions, concerns, or comments on that point.
Is there any chance of staking their token along with Bitcoin and ETH?
We haven't contemplated that at that point because we don't know that they even have a token.
I can't see that you could prevent the systems from interoperating.
Oh no, the RChain architecture is designed so that these networks can interoperate. So the whole point is that any fork of the code should be able to interoperate with these networks. Yeah. So there's a question in the chat about impact on the recruitment of validators. At this point, I can't say. The response from the networks has not been clear at all. But we'll if we gather any intelligence, or if anyone has any other intelligence, that we'll be sure to share, and we hope that other people will share as well. Okay. Any other questions on that point? Great. Yes, Ed, I think you're probably right. Okay, so now let's take a clear statement about transactions. So as Zach was pointing out, his notion of transaction has to do with the transfer of a data asset from one agent to another. That was the simplest characterization. If Zach, are you still on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that characterize your notion of transaction?
Yeah, that's just a real general definition, because obviously there's a lot more. There are a lot of variables that also need to be considered, because it depends on the use case and the system. But in most systems, I think that can be that definition can be applied to most systems, I believe.
You know what? And I am 100% in agreement. And that was the insight ultimately that resulted in the RChain proposal in the first place.
Right. So, like, if I'm mailing a letter to you, what is the process of mailing that letter? Does it go, when it's in the mailbox, and then it's received by the postman, and then it's brought to you? And when you can open that letter, you have, you own it, you control it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the insight that lines up the row calculus model of computation with the blockchain in the first place. So in particular, the model of computation that we're using in RChain has senders and receivers.
Right.
And when a sender meets a receiver, that transfer of data is called a COM event.
Right.
And this lines up precisely with the definition that Zach has been operating.
Sorry, Greg, but it sounds actually that Zach is talking about end-to-end. So
that's correct.
The wallets are also affected. So it doesn't
No. He defines it as any data asset. So you don't necessarily have to have a wallet involved at all.
Right. In most cases, when we refer to a transaction, it refers to the transfer of a token or asset, cryptographic asset, between accounts or wallets. But that would be just another detail based on the system. Because think about TCP/IP. What happens when a packet is transferred, right? It's the same characteristics. It's the same data structure. So that's it.
Yeah. So when you interact with the chain, you do have like let's say Ethereum, you pay with gas, right?
Right.
That's part of the transaction.
Yes, that would be part of the transaction, because that is necessary in order for the transaction to be processed. If you don't add enough gas to the transaction you're sending out and it's returned to you, it is not a transaction. It is an invalid transaction.
And that's exactly what happens in the COM event for RChain, right?
Here's the apples and garage door openers issue, which is that when we talk about the fact that Visa affects, n tens of thousands of transactions per whatever, we intuitively know that this means that money was transferred from one party to another without thinking about all of the individual.
Can everyone who's not talking mute, please?
So just to repeat, I think that there's an apples to garage door openers comparison, to borrow a favorite phrase of one of my paleontologist friends, that when we talk about, Visa doing 40,000 transactions per second, what is intuitively understood is that is the successful transfer of money from one party to another, regardless of how many COM events take place. I do not know how many COM events are required for Visa to transfer money from one party to another. That's what I'm getting at.
Probably very little. Visa operates in an entirely closed system in which they have total control. So you can, it sounds like what you're talking about, COM events would just equate to like bumps in the wire. Then would a COM event be packet hits a router and then it goes somewhere else, or would that be a COM event in your definition?
So I believe I can answer this, right? So the COM event corresponds to data transfer. Some data transfer involves a wallet, right? And so when you have wallet data transfer, you can count the number of COM events that are associated with a particular implementation of a wallet. But there will be different implementations of wallets in the RChain system, and different implementations will result in different total numbers of COM events. So that's entirely up to the implementation of a wallet.
I think,
and this is why it's really, really important to reason in terms of application events rather than just financial events, because financial events are only a small class of the total class of transactions that will be conducted through RChain. Many dApps will be engaged in data transfers, especially supply chain management dApps. They'll be engaged in data transfers more than they're engaged in token transfers.
Yeah, but also if we want to keep getting technical about it, then the analogy I used about the envelope is incorrect, because you're not actually sending anything when you're transferring assets in the system. All you're doing is broadcasting your intent to transfer this balance from your account to another person's account. And this isn't really anything that's physical, and it's not like a JPEG or like a file, right? You're just broadcasting your intent to transfer that value to another account, and then the rest of the network comes to an agreement on the state of your particular account and whether it meets the criteria to allow the event to occur. Yeah. So that's
we can continue to have this conversation, but I think that there's a very, very close alignment between Dan's characterization of notion of transaction and the notion of COM event that we have in RChain. But we'll of course we'll as we find the way to present the language clearly, we'll make sure that we get that documented and up and available for people to investigate and internalize.
I think what they're saying here is that, when you send money to a person, you're going to do several COM events just to find out who that person is, where that person is.
Well, you shouldn't have to really determine who the person is. It's just a matter of math and cryptographic proof, which is included in their signature.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is, Jim, the point is that that's implementation dependent. And so different wallets and different notions of token and an application token will result in different ratios of COM events to some application level exchange. And that's why the COM event is the best thing to measure, because it's going to be implementation dependent.
So Jamie asks, what point does COM versus transaction become the equivalent of what? So it may seem like we're arguing about semantics and minutia, but identifying and defining these metrics is really important to understand the proper function of a system.
Exactly. What is it you're measuring?
Yeah, because it's arbitrary. If we're like certain systems I've worked with have defined their transaction as the moment the transaction leaves the owner's realm of control and reaches the mempool of the receiver before it's even processed. So then that would actually lower your throughput or that would increase your throughput, right? Because you're not accounting for the processing time. So, and I think that would be an incorrect definition.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
So this is all.
The only reason I've been hovering over this is that for whatever reason, we're in the number of megapixels comparisons of, does our camera have more megapixels than others? And transactions per second or whatever is unfortunately one of the criteria by which blockchain performance aspects is measured. So all I'm really pushing at is that I want to make sure that we have apples to apples comparisons. If some other blockchain is claiming 50 transactions per second, 1,000 or whatever, I just want to make sure that we're consistent and correct. But I want to move away from the I want to congratulate Jamie Cook for saying, let's not worry about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. I think I just wanted to give a really quick update on what's happening in RChain Asia, which is that I've been asked by the Korean government to sit on a board, a government-appointed board with Brock Pierce and members of the MIT Media Lab and so forth to spearhead an initiative from the Korean government to encourage 220,000 companies to adopt blockchain. And the Korean government is going to be offering RChain off space in a facility, a $400 million facility, to encourage the adoption of blockchain. Similarly, the Singaporean government, we have relationships here, is pushing us to do some things here. And I think it's really important that just two people here in RChain Asia can be getting such opportunities. I encourage everybody else in the RChain community to be enterprising and identify opportunities for the proliferation of the adoption of our technology. So that's my brief little update. And we'll be getting television interviews and other things happening. So please be enterprising.
I think it's really awesome the way Jonathan has turned around the funding game and getting paid for doing training and development instead of paying for it. And that's what we're trying to do in the collab also.
Yeah. Actually, thank you, Jim, for articulating that. Basically, I'm turning the old model of co-op and venture capital opportunities, and instead of paying for people to come onto blockchain or onto RChain, I'm looking for ways to actually get paid by other entities to adopt us.
That's awesome, Jonathan. And with that, that's a great note to end on. Thanks, everyone, for another awesome community hangout. And looking forward to talking to you guys next week.
Any updates on marketing?
That's currently being, marketing is being restructured. We will have more updates next week.
Derek is here. He can tell us something.
Okay.
Well, I can talk about what we're doing, but I mean, at the moment, with the group, right now, I'm just continuing ahead with the podcast and the blog updates and all the social media, which I'm handling. So, I mean, I could talk about that, but I'd rather wait till next week until we have a little more clarity on the whole all the parameters of the department.
Yep. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're 9 minutes over the hour, and I have meetings that I have to get to. So I'm going to leave the meeting. People feel free to stay around, but I think it was a really, really awesome conversation today.
So you can leave this window or this Zoom session open?
Sure. It depends on Christian.
I'm happy to do that. We should just define these time limits going forward in case I have scheduled something at 12:30, but today is fine. I'm happy to leave the room open and the live stream going for discussion.
Thank you, Christian.
No problem. I mean, we could talk about that going forward on one point. I mean, does everyone feel like 1 hour is enough time to get through all these items of business? Do we want to extend these meetings to 1 hour and 15 minutes going forward, or perhaps 1 hour and 30 minutes?
I think
we should, leave a half hour leeway to complete the meeting.
Okay, so 90 minutes. Okay.
So does anybody have any pressing issues that have not been addressed yet?
I'll just, this isn't pressing, but if no one's talking, I'll just bring this up real quickly because I was on Discord looking. Somebody was complaining that, and maybe Christian, you can address, I don't know if there's a way, but they follow the community meeting on YouTube and are posting questions there, but no one's answering, obviously, because we look at the Zoom chat. So I don't know if there's any possible way of offering some way for people who tune into YouTube to be able to ask questions.
So basically, okay, let's just break it down really quickly. I mean, I can spam YouTube all day long with questions, right? Like at some point, it's about attention. So if the meeting gets out of control, then it's no point even having this meeting. So that's the first point. Second point is, like, I'm happy to pull questions from YouTube and be like the moderator of the room. I don't really like to do that though, because I like to keep my role as neutral. As like, just, in terms of the integrity of the role, someone who just comes here and provides the stream and, stays out of the meeting in general. That way it's like a neutral party. But, I'll just stop there, on those 2 points.
It would be good if questions in YouTube were copied into the chat.
And they're also, the first question was, I appreciate an explanation and comments on the project manager and 2 developers. It's like, we can give you an explanation, but like those people who decide to leave or otherwise, like they're not even explaining publicly their reasons for leaving. So I don't know how much explanation you want. Again, this is, what will happen in the event of a competing company having mainnet before RChain? You can speculate, no one knows. I don't know. I guess at some point, like the people asking these questions want the board to answer them. And it's just like, you kind of have to make up your own mind is my point about like what you think is going to happen versus what's just happening on the day to day. It's a decentralized project, right? So I don't know. There's no insurance policies. You know what I mean? Like, again, I don't speak for the board, but I'm just talking openly here.
I think that Craig pretty much summed it up when he said it's a matter of who follows the cooperative model and who follows the corporate model. I think whenever the co-op comes online with mainnet, we'll use it.
It seems like we should, at the very least, and perhaps this is already done, but the YouTube should have information about becoming a member, so then they can join Discord, etc.
Yeah, there's so many things I could do. I could create I can take the public link because I know the public link. I don't know if anyone else knows the public link to the Discord, and I can post it on the actual YouTube channel, right? So people can, once they open the main page, they can just see join Discord at the top right? But there's supposed to be a process in which you become a member. So like, instead of just doing that, then it becomes like, okay, what link directs them to like the sort of pipeline to become a member? And these are all discussions that like we should have in terms of internal operations or marketing, because it's very important to kind of understand what links you want to put in the description of each YouTube channel going forward. Because the links change. For example, there was multiple links to public documents posted in the Zoom chat today. I'm going to take those links and then post them in the YouTube chat, right? And then I can take the Zoom chat and also put it in a fresh like Google Drive. And then like, again, the question becomes like, who hosts that data? Like, I don't really want to do that because again, I'm just someone who records the meetings. I can do it if the board or the membership says, Christian, we need you to do this. But I just want to be very clear on my role, because I kind of view my position as a neutral party, someone who doesn't interfere with kind of like the meeting or otherwise. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. It seems to me like there's out of the music business, there's the street team. And it seems to me like if the going forward, and maybe this is for Derek's consideration, but going forward, if there were a component of the marketing strategy was greeters and ambassadors and so forth, there might be opportunities. People have time to volunteer to hang out in the YouTube, addressing the questions best they can, and just promoting the idea of membership. That might be constructive.
Sure, and I know there's been some talks about the KYC process and making it better. I think there's just been a few things that have been taking precedence in the last couple of weeks, but what you've just expressed is something we've talked about and will be addressed in the next coming weeks for sure.
I think the one thing that the one link that we should always use is the RChain.coop. I mean, that's where they can find out about becoming a member and all this stuff. And we want them to become a member.
Josh, give me 2 seconds to verify that link is public. He's asking about the Discord link. 1 second.
So while we're all hanging out here and enjoying this extra time, and I really appreciate it, I would like to propose that we talk about the highest priority things that are going on right now and identify them and talk about them.
All right, Jonathan, what was the point you brought up there?
The point is that we're collected here as parts of the community. This is awesome that we're all here. Let's be unafraid about talking about things that concern us.
Well, one thing I have for you, John, I don't know if you have the time, but I will be going to Dubai in about 10 days for about 2 weeks. There is a conference at the end of the month on the 27th. Would you potentially be interested in going to that?
I will be in Bangkok.
Okay. I wonder if anybody from RChain Europe could potentially speak on behalf of RChain. So I don't know if there's yeah.
About
so
what
that's
specifically?
Really
Sorry, Steve, what was that?
About what specifically would you want them to
Well, speak about the entire project. I mean, if there's a speaking engagement or opening, there's still time. Like there's still 20 days before the conference. And Dubai, as we know, is a leader as is South Korea and China in terms of the blockchain industry, in terms of the entire government going forward with initiatives to implement this technology, everywhere from payment to otherwise. So I think that having a presence there, I mean, I'm going there independently. I'm not going to Dubai and spending company money, just, for the fuck of it. But what I'm saying is I'm there in Dubai and like, I'm probably going to go to that conference just because, it's a good thing to go to. It's not costing RChain anything. However, if someone is formally speaking on behalf of RChain there, I do think that that person should be qualified and paid to go and to do that, because the opportunities potentially coming out of that conference are probably far-reaching.
Well, I agree entirely. There's two things. I would imagine that Jonathan or Jocelyn would be the better party to speak for that. And two, RChain Europe is currently on a volunteer basis, so that one might be harder.
Got it. Understood. So yeah, you'd have to submit sort of proposal if Jocelyn or Jonathan couldn't go, and then if someone. I'm sure people, again, from RChain Europe are qualified. I understand that potentially the funding issue is a big problem, but
yeah.
Yeah, there's no way that Jocelyn or I can get to Dubai. We've already got commitments, first of all, and second, we don't have the budget to fly to Dubai.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I was okay. I just know, like, I think out of Asia or out of Europe, it's cheaper to get to Dubai than. I mean, it's for me. Again, I'm kind of going there for a quasi vacation and business. So, I spent, I think $2,000 for 2 weeks, which is like really cheap. It's Dubai. I was like, well, that's not bad at all. So I'm sure there's ways to get down the cost of the trip. But like I said, I'll be there. I can forward any of the business opportunities to the co-op or RChain Europe, RChain Asia afterwards. It's not necessary, but I just thought it'd be a good point to bring up in case we're bringing up things that concern us, so to speak.
No, it is. Can you send them to me and Ella?
Sure. Yeah, I can CC you in.
Perfect.
Great. I'd like to do something here, kind of like a Hollywood Squares thing. I'm going to randomly pick somebody who's not spoken yet.
Jonathan, can you randomly pick me?
Sure, Glenn.
If you had somebody else in mind, please go ahead. But I just had a quick, if there's time, I'd like a little more information on what you were talking about with the opportunity in Korea. And I don't know if it's the same opportunity as Singapore is investing with, but I think the Korean one, I think they're separate, and I'm interested in the Korean one.
Okay, so based on your compensated open source model, Peter Harris has developed a really brilliant notion of modularity of dApps, and I'm not sure you've been talking to him yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. So you're familiar with his hexagons, right?
Yep.
Great. So RChain Asia is going to be communicating this notion in some presentations, and Peter Finn, who is the director, unpaid, I might add, director of technical investor relations for RChain Asia, is really loving what you've done. And I'm going to be incorporating your notions of compensated open source to at least one of the presentations that I'm giving in the next 2 weeks as a compelling model for why to invest in the RChain platform.
Awesome. Okay, so development on those contracts, meaning licenses that are written in Rolang and could be attached to any functionality. For instance, Joshi and I were just this morning looking at his package manager and to see how we could build, packages of code that would be under these types of licenses. So any help that you would like on that, please reach out.
Right, and for the value of everybody else, basically what we're thinking about is sort of like plug and play modules. So if a given site needs to have, for example, identity control or some other thing that is common attributes that would be required for the development of the app, we would have a compensated open source module that would be available. And each particular dApp is going to have unique things that need to be written, but the basic notion is to, I'm going to go back to my evolutionary biology perspective about things, is to think about construction of dApps like how the non-mammalian animal kingdom works. All of these organisms that have multiple iterations of the same fundamental structure that is built upon, like Drosophila or arthropods. So we basically have a Bauplan, to use the phrase of Gregory Bateson Sr. That can be a template that is used multiple times. Is that about right, Greg? I mean, Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, that is the idea, is that these dependencies, the compensated open source is a model where you collect fees for the use of the code, but it becomes free of charge once the compensation has been reached, and we create
standard ways that we are transparent about the compensation requests. What Peter is putting together is a request for some funds to ask people to say, well, if you purchase some of these, if you help compensate to some level, to basically a level that people can survive and live and so on, then that will incentivize people to build using this model. The rest of their compensation would come from the fees that would be collected down the road. And then those are shared until compensation is fully met. So that's awesome, Jonathan, that you're putting it together. And I can certainly, with as we see libraries of components that we put together, whether it's around identity or all sorts of different components, the idea that there would be a flow of fees paid to use this, and that would fund and incentivize development. It's a fee-based model as opposed to a speculative model of tokens of ownership. And I personally feel it's much better to have people rewarded for the fact that people actually use what they've produced.
Right. And what Peter has done is to extend your notion to that if a person develops a open source compensated module, that people that want to develop dApps have something that they can just essentially buy and be part of their fundamental infrastructure. We don't need all of the dApp developers to recreate a bunch of stuff if we have a library of modules.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, please reach out if you need any help in supporting your efforts there. I'm really, really tickled that that's happening.
Oh yeah, Peter Finn, again, is a huge fan, and we're collaborating with Peter Berlin, Peter Harris. Phil, you've not said anything. Hello? Okay, how about Joshi? Does Joshi have anything to say?
Hey, I'm here. I don't know, man. There's a lot on everybody's mind right now. I appreciated you trying to pin down something about transactions. I think my 2 cents on that conversation is that there's not just one useful notion of transactions, but like you were saying, we need to make fair comparisons. And I think we're at a point in the community where it's best to speak bluntly, and it makes me really angry the way that Greg is intentionally dishonest about transactions. I hear him talk about how we always mean com event by transaction, which is great because it's a mathematically rigorous definition, and I'd love it if that were the case, or if people understood that. But then in the next breath, I hear him say, and Bitcoin has however many transactions per second, and it's a totally different meaning. So that was on my mind just now.
I'm not convinced you're right there, Joshi. I mean, there is the fact that the latency of the transactions right now is very poor. But the ability to initiate a transaction is high performance, and it is, as you said, basically, I mean, the simple case is, you execute a hello world contract, okay, and it goes through the cryptographic process. It delivers the message, and that message could be anything, and it's received by the recipient. Okay, now looking up the address of the contract and doing these things is another measure, okay, that we can say, well, we can go through the URN of a contract, or the URI, whatever it is, to getting it on the blockchain, okay.
So if I could, may I?
Sure, go ahead.
Joshy, I share your frustration with the way Greg talks about the issue of transaction speed. I also get this. Why is he seeming to be defensive or to be trying to push out other ideas? I think that there are some legal or some sort of agreements that says that the transaction rate must equal X, and that's a deliverable. And so there's a lot of I think that there's a reason to say I have to define it as COM events so that I can hit my number. Now, if we were talking to people who want to come to the platform or invest in the platform, and if in that context of a conversation we were comparing it with one platform or another, then we have to be able to say, okay, I see, you're defining transaction as the transfer of someone's tokens from person A to person B. And like Kent put in our chat here, that's about 10 COM events currently with the current wallet implementation, which has a bug and is going to require more COM events coming down the line. So it would be dishonest to speak to that person if you're in that context of comparing it with Ethereum or something like that, to say that COM events equals their transactions. That would be misrepresenting the truth. At the same time, if you are building a computer and you need this way to say this, you need a formal definition of what you mean by a transaction when you're doing an engineering project. And I think a COM event is absolutely a valid definition.
I agree with you 100% on all of that, Glenn. That was really, really well said. The part that's frustrating for me is that I think Greg frequently and intentionally engages in that dishonesty that you described.
Absolutely agree on that. And I mean, otherwise, one could also say that for Bitcoin, one says that every unspent transaction output can be counted towards one transaction. But apparently, that's not used as the meaning of transaction in Bitcoin. Or in Ethereum, every internal transaction would count towards the number of transactions.
I do say that, to defend Greg a bit here, I think that he is seeing into the future where the action of transferring a token from person A to B is a small portion of the COM events that happen down the road. And so while everyone has that definition in their mind today of a transaction, I think he's looking down the road where that's not where those financial transactions are not insignificant, but they're still, that's clearly not what we, when we look at computers over the last 20, 30 years, we use them for millions of things. And I think he's just looking that way down the road where it's just transferring tokens from A to B is not the only thing that we're building. That's the way I see it.
True, but again, then it's unfortunate that in the same breath he's using the comparison with Visa level transaction volume.
Yes. So actually, Phil,
Yeah.
How about this? So if we looked at Bitcoin or Ethereum, not in terms of transactions per second, but COM events per event, what would COM events be for Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Well, I think what Kent sent today was it's about 10 COM events for what is a Bitcoin or Ethereum transfer of tokens. So you would have to take the RChain COM event rate and divide by 10 essentially to get what the rate of those financial transactions would be.
No, my point is, maybe I missed the point, which is that for a Bitcoin or Ethereum transaction, is it divisible into COM events?
Well, that's what I thought I was asking. I don't think you can. They don't have their architecture does not have COM events. That's just not. It's just not part of their architecture.
I would, yeah. I would say it comes down to the perspective that in RChain there is no external actor, such as there is no account within the computational model or within the protocol itself, but rather there are just processes, and you define those wallets within this context. And in Bitcoin and Ethereum, there's this notion of a transaction, unspent transaction output, or the account. So there is something like an external identity provided, and this is kind of bringing in a new way to look on the system. And therefore, in Ethereum, you can say one basic transaction exists where it costs 21,000 Ether to send from one external account to another, 21,000 gas from one external account to another. But this doesn't exist within RChain because there is no external expression of an identity. So it is quite complicated to transfer this notion of a COM event to Ethereum. You could speak of internal transactions. You could speak of state changes within the virtual machine. Items in storage changed or whatsoever. And yeah, that would kind of go in the direction, but wouldn't really grasp the idea of a COM event.
I think the problem is actually interesting. I think that Greg has made it a very important part of RChain identity. This comparison to Visa and Facebook, which is readily accessible to anyone with any amount of knowledge about contemporary processes. And yet, it seems clear that at an architectural level, the quantities that are being compared may not stand up. But that actually is useful information to understand that there is a different architecture as well. So it'd be worth making kind of a graphic for it, I think.
I don't know how he can explain that. I don't believe he's lying, and if if on Ethereum you just send Ether to another account, that's one COM event. And I think.
Well, not exactly. I mean, they would not be apples to apples, and I think that is at the core problem. Is that I think when we're using, when it does matter how you define this thing, and I know that if you're in sort of a marketing or let's say high-level business type of discussion, I mean, in that context, are you really going to go into those gritty details about what a transaction is versus not? Well, we oftentimes you don't, and it can lead to this type of confusion, and that's okay. I think when I hear it from Greg, I don't get frustrated that I feel he's being dishonest. I get frustrated that he's being defensive where he really needn't be.
Yeah, he's not always his best representative. And, he probably.
I really feel like parsing our experience with Greg from the conversation and trying to work with functional discussion of the matters at hand. And I was gonna say a smart-ass remark back to Glenn, which was, well, that's the function of poetry, is to say things quickly and concisely. Because I think there is a way to frame it so that one understands that, okay, this is an imperfect model, but yeah, we can do a lot of stuff really fast because of this architecture. It's comparable to Facebook, Visa, booking airline tickets, or any other kind of urgent global requirements of contemporary life. So this is a solution where these other ones fail, and this is why. And in fact, some of the materials already get into that. Right. But I think it's a compelling business case And then there's a step back to explain why some of the quantitative comparisons don't work out. But this is very important. This is why Jonathan is bringing it to the conversation, because we have, people are in the real world trying to, we're trying to compete with other solutions, and this is a brilliant solution.
It would be frustrating to see if somebody had a chart and one product had the number 10 or 10,000 or some number next to it, and we had 8,000, or it's just like that's too it just wouldn't. That's too shallow of a analysis. And I think everything that way RChain is designed in terms of its concurrency model and its understanding of dependencies, we're going to have performance will improve and improve and improve, even though the first step out is to be performant. But even our programming techniques will have to get better, and we will learn how to optimize our solutions, how we develop them. That's a long-term process. But I certainly buy the architecture as one that can reach to those scales. But at the same time, in my own code, for instance, I've had to create cases where I've forced serialization, meaning the concurrency just is going to stop. So it does come to our choices and how we design and architect on top of the system. So it's pretty nuanced to say, what will the actual user experience be? Right, and that's going to take a lot of experiential type of learning to see for ourselves, and it's more than just a number. It's a more complex.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I used as a metaphor megapixels for cell phones, and I could use the example of when we had ISP, internet service providers, and an internet service provider would say, "Oh, you'll get 32,000 whatever," and then another one would say, "No, you'll get 46,000," and another one would come in and say, "You'll get 46,100," and those numbers just become like kind of ridiculous. It's not that your cell phone has a certain number of megapixels. It's what the user interface is, what it's trying to solve, what it does. And I think that we need to think outside the tesseract here in branding ourselves and not get caught up in these number games, and start thinking in terms of what is the value proposition of this thing. Why is my iPhone a better user experience than this Samsung? Not how many megapixels you can get with your iPhone camera, and that's I'm straining for gnats and swallowing straining for flies and swallowing gnats, but you get the general idea.
Yeah, well, so that's great that you can see that and being able to share that with people who are interested in the platform. Obviously, when you're looking at people interested in investing in the platform, the more they are in tune with coming into those details, that's just so awesome. And I do wonder, at least especially in the broader crypto space, that may not be the norm or may not be all that common. It's much, as I say, a shallower, not that deep of an analysis of the technical underpinnings. And so at the same time, well, do you want those folks to not be interested in RChain? Is there a reason that they would not be interested? Well, no, that shouldn't be the case. So it's a tough communication problem for sure.
Right. You've got an IT guy who says to the manager, "I've decided to adopt this blockchain," and this the business owner goes, "Oh yeah, I've read a little bit blockchain. It's like an almost Dilbert kind of thing." And he goes, "Oh, so how many transactions per second?" And he goes, Oh, it's 2,000. Well, I just read an article that is, there's this other thing that does 3,000 transactions. You're fired.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of like the weird thing that we have to deal with right now.
Yeah. So no, it's like saying, well, this blockchain rhymes and it smells good. It's qualitative versus quantitative.
Yeah.
But I think we do have to answer customers that a token transfer takes 10 comm events.
That's right. I think it is if we understand that they're hearing what in any conversation, if we think someone is hearing us in one way, but we're intentionally misleading, or it doesn't serve anyone. But understanding, I think it really does come down to the promise of a hard number. And Greg is very keen to keep that promise of a hard number of an engineering deliverable to the comm event number. And I think he's completely justified in doing that.
Yeah, well, he lives in the future. He sees a fully optimized transaction of any complexity happening with one bit of information.
Perhaps, yes. But when any of us are out just generally talking or even presenting it does help to be more clear and honest about that, for sure. I don't think it's bad at all. Just that if someone thinks we're talking one thing but we really aren't, then we need to be clear about that.
I want to add a totally different jag to this. Based on my experience in RChain Asia, which is that in RChain Asia and my interactions, it's not because RChain is, does X transactions versus another. What it's actually coming down to is my social capital. What it's coming down to is whether people trust me that I'm telling them something true. And this is not something that we can do in a blog post or whatever, but all of us as individuals that are communicating about RChain, insofar as possible, it comes down to a matter of trust.
Yep.
Does this person trust me that I'm presenting them a good solution? And that, to me, is what's hardest about this fork right now. It's not that I disagree with the fact that the fork is going on. I cannot fault Renal and Meta for engaging in the fork. That's their way of dealing with their frustration about management and whatnot. My way of dealing with frustration about management has been to create my own independent organization here in Asia, where I'm kind of shielded from the R drama and whatnot. But I'm finding that what's making RChain Asia successful is that I'm being very honest with people and I'm creating social capital. I'm not talking about transactions per second. I'm explaining to them why RChain solution and concurrency and all the other attributes of the strength of a smart contract in Rolang as opposed to Solidity. Those are the things that matter. And developing, I think that I just took a 180. We were talking about numbers as metrics for adoption, but I think one of the most important things for
You're dropping out a little bit, Jonathan, for me.
Yeah, he dropped that. There you go. You're back.
Okay, so I think one of the most important things is not numbers and performance and whatnot, but the trust that we have with effective adopters. And that, I'm going to be honest with you. Oh, yeah, you know what? Maybe your particular needs are going to be met better by EOS or Cardano or Silica or whomever.
Yeah, I mean, well, currently, you think of people that I've seen have come to the RChain community or any blockchain that are just focused on transaction volume. I kind of wonder
maybe they do have immediate needs, and so they have a really short term, like I need this in 3 months or I need this in 1 month, and that's fine. They can make that purchase decision based on that. But if it's that you're trying to decide on a platform for a longer term strategy, I think there's lots of reasons to come to RChain that don't really have anything to do with just transaction volumes. Those should be a byproduct of the concurrency design and all that. It should just be there. But to me, it's coming to the model and the Erlang language and its computational model. That's absolutely the core of it for me. And so, but if everyone, if the energy out there of why to use these blockchain computers is just in this transactional world, then you kind of have to be, you have to be aware of that. To me, it's all about the security, the fact that I have a computer system that I can write code that I can guarantee no one else has access to that. No one else can perform actions on the whole system. It's just absolutely secure. If I have a capability, if I have a name in my possession, so to speak, as a programmer, that no one else can have that. It's the unforgeable name. That, to me, that's absolutely the capability that's so important. And the fact that we've all come to consensus on the execution of whatever logic I put together. I think that's what Zach was getting at, where he's like, I don't know if you caught it, but he did say, I don't really care about performance to some extent. And I don't think that's really true. I think he does care about performance, but we all do. But I think that it's just the broader concept of having this computation system that comes to consensus, and a powerful one and an expressive one that is really the reason to come to RChain, in my view.
A world computer algorithmically constrained to obey my contracts.
Yep.
Well, and
go ahead.
In the circles I work in, what I find works best is to say that Erlang, as a computing language, mimics and models how the real world works in terms of agents communicating with each other, sending messages, listening for messages, negotiating, and whatnot. And as an evolutionary biologist and somebody who studied ecosystems, I'm very familiar with the fact that within an ecosystem, there is lots of concurrency. There's concurrency and interactions and passing of messages and agents engaging in activities. And part of Greg's inspiration came from his work in biomedicine and understanding how cells communicate and understanding how a body works. So when I try to explain concurrency to people, to lay people, I say, well, concurrency is happening in your body right now. Every single one of your cells in your body has a complete set of chromosomes, and every set of chromosomes in each cell is expressing itself individually and independently. It's the same code. It's like a bunch of virtual machines. We are, our entire body is a set of virtual machines made up of cells with the identical code base. And the cells in our ganglia in our brain do the ganglia brains, genetic expression, and the cells that are in our pancreas do the pancreas thing. But they've all got the same code base, and they're all doing it independently, concurrently. And that, to me, is really, the beauty of this whole thing, is that it mimics how the real world works. The old model of computation that is a von Neumann tape with a series of serial instructions is not how the world works. That's an abstraction. That's a tiny subset of reality. Ideally, when RChain and Erlang are fully expressed and are have syntactic sugar and have is fully feature complete, it's a model of the world.
Absolutely. I mean, the von Neumann architecture is kind of like a single mind, right, with our memory and manipulating our memory. And the mobile calculus is a network-based computation. It blew the pi calculus or mobile calculus blew my mind when I first came onto that, and really that is the core of why I'm interested in this platform for sure.
I think reliable process orchestration is very important and something that business people understand.
Yep.
This comes out of the whole issue of how we control processes on a network and how they fail. And all of these fancy process orchestration tools have pretty much died because the systems don't end up working because they're not using row calculus yet.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, that's, I'm with you with your integrity. That is super important. And I hope that we can do everything to support your all of our integrity.
Yeah, I'd actually like to get a reality check from Phil. Phil, do my biological metaphors work for you as a really deep thinker about such things and a person with blockchain experience? Is this notion that the concurrency of that's hopefully will be provided by Erlang mimics biological systems and multiple cells in a body? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I gave a few talks about how RChain scales like nature, and took up some ideas Greg put forward in his very early presentations of a year ago or so. So it's absolutely the model I use to describe the benefits of RChain's concurrency. And it is actually how the world actually scales and how financial systems scale. It's not like there is just one big database, but there are several big databases. And within each concurrency model, there is its own one. And so you have this kind of notion of concurrency as different kind of currencies are mostly independent. And then there is this notion of compositionality, that you have smaller communities and there's engagement within both larger structures. So there's a lot of similarities to how the real world actually works.
I think it's important to say, Jonathan, that of course all these things happen in concurrently today. The key point here is that there's now a formal language to describe that phenomena.
Yes.
And that's what we're implementing. And that's amazing, because once you have a formal language to model that phenomena, now there's a meta aspect of it where you can reason about the reasoning. and so once you've created that model that you can capture that that concurrency, now you can you get a common. It happens already, but you don't have a way to describe it and discuss it and talk about it right now. It just happens sort of as not a thing with a handle that can be pointed at and discussed. And then even once it's discussed, it's not done in using the same language. When we use Erlang this way, we can actually go from the smallest transaction in one place and see it propagate across an entire network and use the same terms as we discuss those transitions. That accelerates the pace of growth in that area, in the innovation. So the fact that this model, I hope, will provide that amazing growth of, sort of like when you bring object-oriented programming in, you could do the exact same thing in machine language or in assembler, but the fact is you don't, because those higher order constructs allow you to I guess abstract away a lot of the aspects that would clog your mind. And so when you build up these concurrent constructs, now you build new things because you have those tools.
Right. And actually you lead me to a very important point, which is that we're all like, in this blockchain world, and we think that every, screwdriver and hammer is a solution to blockchain problems. I think that actually the crown jewel of this project might not have anything to do with blockchain at all. I think that the crown jewel might be the development of Rolang as a general purpose language that has incredible utility and unique values for telecommunications applications or research, or I don't even know.
So, John, I talked to Kent about that the other day, and I also want to include the CPT Casper framework as the other innovation that RChain is offering, if they implement that with the Rolang as well. So I would say there's two innovations on the table.
Right. And Nutzipper asks, and thank you for engaging, Nutzipper. How does Rolang differ from conventional, I think you mean functional languages? And I think that's a very, it's a great question, and I think it's a fair question, and I think it's an easy question to answer by maybe Glenn.
Yeah, so I'll try. So functional languages are generally patterned off the lambda calculus, and Rolang is patterned off the row calculus, but really its base comes from the pi calculus. So if you don't know what those are, then I didn't say anything meaningful. The functional languages don't have a concurrency model that Rolang does. For Rolang, it's funny, you cannot do two things in sequence. You can't say x equals 1 and then say x equals x plus 1. You just can't code that. Everything has to be done through a pair of send and receives, and so it's a completely concurrent model. It's wacky. If you're a developer in other languages, it will seem strange, but the more you become familiar with that, you get a sense of that's maybe a really nice view of how we all act. All of us can be in a mode where we are taking in information, and all of us can be in a mode where we're spitting it out, and so it works well in a concurrent model. And the fact that there's a formalism of the pi calculus to capture computation made up of a series of those, or a series, is really pretty amazing. So I don't know if that helped, but
I think the key difference is that relational is stateless, more or less, whereas Rolang carries state and channels.
Yeah, it's tough to know if, based on what.
Yeah.
If I were, it's you could think of it as an event-based model, I guess, an actor model.
Yeah, and one of the things about it is you can sort of write in in a relational way, or an object-oriented way, or an actor sort of a way in Rolang, which makes it pretty versatile.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it, even though it is different from your regular any language I've ever programmed in.
Yeah.
It's different from anything like it.
It's definitely mind altering.
Yes.
People are lucky that haven't been exposed to any program.
But I to get to your point, Jonathan, about I think that the blockchain market, if you will, is certainly a reasonable market for us, especially the fact that we do have Casper, and so we've built an economic model about how to come to consensus over a network of machines executing this contract. But I would agree that and that's fantastic to have that capability. But a lot of the applications that I could see building would not necessarily require, certainly not a global consensus of execution. I would be fine if it came to consensus among 10 people, and quite honestly, those 10 people could probably even say, we don't even need the Casper aspect. Not to downplay it as a technology, just that I think there's tons of opportunities to use Rolang that didn't necessarily require consensus around its execution.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and also would just want to echo that it happens to be that Rolang offers some properties that are very neat within the blockchain space, and that the computational model fits those requirements within the blockchain space quite neatly. So I guess it is not the other way around, that one tried to build a computational model that kind of fits the requirements for a blockchain space, but rather it happens to be that this computational model fits all requirements.
Yep.
Absolutely, Phil. Brilliantly put. And I want to put another thinking outside the Tesseract thing, which is, rather than thinking we've got a computer language, what's it trying to do? Let's instead just, each of you look outside the real world, and let's say that you want to capture what's happening right now in front of you. Right now, I'm sitting in Singapore, and I'm seeing automobiles, and I'm seeing rain, I'm seeing buildings, I'm seeing all these different things. So if we were to build a model of computation starting from the reality around us, as opposed to the limitations of hardware and computers, would it resemble Rolang?
Well, my personal interest is to model interactions within groups of people in the language, to actually sort of capture the models of how authority is, to model authority itself, human authority in decision making. So that's my hope, and I can certainly, in my mind, certainly see, we are doing it right now. We are talking and communicating over a channel, and so that absolutely is Rolang. And
we are each autopoietic agents, sending messages, listening for messages, negotiating, and coming up with an answer, right?
Yes. That's right. Now, I do not believe that we are only those robots, and I don't think we can code ourselves in Rolang. I don't know. That's a matter of faith and philosophy. But I do believe that the language is capable of modeling an idealized view of our interactions. And once we have that, we can actually reason about them and argue one over another, and we can try one versus another. And I think today we don't innovate that much in terms of our human interactions. They evolve over thousands of years, and that's good. But at the same time, when we start to have a language that we can describe them in, now we can work with them well, it's hard to describe, but we can work with them. We can actually put our hands on them and change them, as opposed to the very hidden process of social innovation or social evolution. That's my particular interest.
So to get philosophical, is one of the innovations of Erlang is that it captures the notion of intentionality.
Well, we wouldn't. Well, I guess we interpret that as an organism, we have the capability to express or to react, and so the intention. I'm not sure we can express intention, because I think that's very philosophical. But we can come up with patterns of behavior that we can model the interactions that happen, and I think that creates a language of intention, and so we can establish trust with one another through those patterns of interactions.
Right. So what I'm doing there is trying to find the boundary of what Erlang can and cannot do. You know, can Erlang capture intentionality? Well, maybe not. Maybe we can only capture the actions of parties and what they signal to each other. But intentionality, maybe that's outside the scope of Erlang.
It may be out. Yes, it may be outside the scope of formal definition.
Yeah, it's like quantum causality. Something happens because we listen for it. And, you know, if listening is expressing an intention to make something happen, I guess it could be considered that.
Right. But imagine a world where you don't even have measures of, you know, a 3D measurements of systems. How do you even communicate things like how far something, I mean, just think about everything in your physical world today. How much is it there because we have just 3D mathematics and, you know, just the simple coordinate system. I mean, that's so important. So I think we've developed, this is another one of those. And
this is what the Digital Life Collective social ledger project is about, and why we want to get it on RChain. It's more important than a financial ledger, and we want to put it in control of the individual, and it connects to all of their activities. It makes a map that the person can use for their own benefit, rather than companies mapping our behavior and using it for their benefit.
Yep. So that's some of it. I don't know, Jonathan, how much your folks that you're talking to are interested in that. That's a very new concept, seems to me. I don't bump into too many people that want to actually program their organizations or program their interactions with people. Yet, if you just simply listen to any people in an organization, they're constantly talking about channels of communication, visibility into communication. What can I say? What can't I say? When can I say it? What should I say? I mean, we talk about it all the time. It is the very nature of an organization. It is in those terms, and so it's funny that I have a hard time getting into a discussion where people are like, oh yeah, we could actually express those in formal terms, and that's a new concept, and I haven't found many people that find that that's a space that they want to innovate and put investment in. So in one sense, economics is absolutely one of those. It's just a really coarse language. It's just a number, $100, $50, whatever. And so economics, though, is one of those systems that we coordinate through. And so that's why we're in this blockchain space, in my opinion. But I think
the more broader view is that these coordination messages and capturing of value will have tremendously more structure than what a physical pocket in our pants or our hands can carry physical items and count. That was our model of computation in this coordination, was simple counting of physical tokens. Well, now we have a language that can model very, very rich, highly structured mobile processes of value communication. And I have no idea where that will lead over the next 100, 500 years, but it's certainly what intrigues me about this space.
Lovely.
Awesome. Well,
the internet consists of mobile asynchronous communicating processes. If we hope to control it, we need the mathematics of mobile asynchronous communicating processes.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Jonathan, for letting us just chat here a bit. We do need to sort of reform ourselves after this disruptive last few weeks. And so I really appreciate you just letting us just share with each other.
Yeah, I felt it was important to all remind ourselves why we are here.
Yep. Awesome. I'm gonna go do some Rolang programming myself.
I'm gonna do some recoding of my subconscious by dreaming.
Very good.
Hey guys, thanks for the discussion. I found it very useful.
Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah, great. Okay, take care, guys. Good seeing you all.
It's been